Hey everybody, welcome to Houdini Hangout. It is the 7th of December, so welcome to the last month of the year to snow if you're in that type of climate. And yeah, we're going to be playing around with some snow again this evening. I think the last time I did anything like this was actually very early in this past year, so I figured, hey, why don't we touch on some snow again and do something like that? So that's what we're going to do today. A lot of people have watched that video on the website. Hey, how's it going? Nice to see you, KG. I'm actually going to just turn that on so we're not getting pop-ups or anything like that. But hello. Okay, hopefully that's good. Um, yeah, so that's the idea for tonight. I have um, a little winter image thing that I'm trying to make. So I was like, well, why don't we make it together and kind of play around with some stuff here on the stream. So the idea is that I think I'm going to do like a snow plow, like pushing through a bunch of snow, and we'll see kind of, where that goes, what happens from there. But, that's the idea, and we'll go forward from there. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for joining tonight. Glad to have you here. And, if you're watching after the fact, glad to have you watching. And please feel free to put comments below. If you have questions or anything like that, I try to keep some tabs on those. But yeah, sometimes it's a little tricky, if you got a bunch of videos or whatever. So I thought I was going to sneeze right there. Sorry. Um, so anyways, yeah, if you are, if you're a new person to using Houdini, if you've been using it for a long time, regardless of, kind of where you are in your journey, happy to have your comments on the stream, in chat, wherever, in our Discord server, wherever you might find or connect with us. So that would be great. If while I'm working on stuff, you notice something that I'm doing and you're like, oh, I think this would be a better way of doing this, or here's a suggestion I have, or this is something I've done before, love to hear that. I don't think there's any such thing as dumb questions or dumb comments or anything like that. Everybody that's in this creative industry is kind of always learning, right? It's not like you ever learn everything. So even if somebody's been using it for 10 years or for 10 months or 10 weeks, there's always something that you can add to the conversation. Even if it's a question just for clarity, that can be really helpful for other people that might be coming into this. So please feel free to put comments or questions wherever you might find helpful to kind of connect with the community. But yeah, just wanted to always like to try to make that little disclaimer. And I'm going to throw this link into the chat. Hopefully that worked. Let me see here. Yeah, there we go. There's a link there to the Discord or to our website, and you can get a link to the Discord server if you aren't, connected. You can go there and connect with us. So, yeah. So why don't we get going, and we'll see what we come up with tonight. So let's jump into some Houdini. Alrighty. So, first of all, let's maybe just talk a little bit about what we're going to do, right? If we're going to do some snow again, probably Vellum is the best choice for that. It's kind of the most flexible as far as something like that might go. Depending on what else you might want to put in your scene, obviously that would interact with quite a few other things. If you had something like a rigid body simulation or whatever, it's really flexible and easy to get that in there as well if you've done like a rigid body sim first or whatever. So, or if you're doing some sort of rigid shape match in Vellum, that's another way that you could go about doing that as well. So quite a few quite a bit of flexibility since Vellum's already kind of a multi-solver, so it's going to give us a nice that nice advantage that we can kind of get a whole bunch of stuff in there a little bit more quickly. Maybe say you wanted to have cloth included with it, or any number of things. Vellum has quite a few different types of solvers and things like that. So yeah, so that's what we're going to be using. We're going to use Vellum. We're probably going to just define an area here that we're going to snow plow out of the way, and we'll just kind of play around and see, just see what makes sense and what we can get going here. So I think the end result of this image that I'm thinking is like I want to have like a snow plow like bearing down on a snowman. I think like. And he looks scared or something like that. That's kind of the image, the final image that I'm going for. I don't think we'll get all the way there tonight or anything, because it'll take a little bit longer than that. But I want to start playing around with the snow simulation and doing some of that kind of stuff. So that's the general gist of the idea here. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So before we get started here, let's first save this just so we got a project going here. Can't believe it's almost the end of the year. Getting crazy. Oh, that reminds me. Also, if you would like to, why did I save that as untitled? Of course I did. Hit enter by mistake, I guess. Snow. Sim. Cool. Speaking of the end of the year and next year and the stream and things like that, if you are so inclined and want to join the Discord server, or would like to vote on some ideas or things like that for next year or for the upcoming year, I can show you real quick. We've got a thing on our server here that's got some polls, and might not be the easiest thing to see maybe on the stream, but we got a couple things here like what kind of content would you be interested in for 2023, and a question about guests, how you feel about guests, whatever. If you're like, yeah, definitely get guests, or whatever, it's cool just having you explain things or whatever. I mean, I personally would really like to have more guests on the stream, so it's something I'm probably going to do, but if everybody's like, please don't do that, that's fine. I could maybe take a hint. But yeah, so there's a lot of options on here. I mean, you can vote for as many or as few as you'd like. I think I allowed 8 of the, what is this, like 12 choices? 4, 8, yeah, 12. So there's 12 choices. So you can pick 8 of them, but obviously the more choices you get, the more kind of it waters down the numbers. So I just wanted to give everybody the opportunity to vote for quite a few things, but I did kind of just figured I'd let you guys choose how few or how many. But the more you vote for, the less your vote counts technically, right? Because if you just hammer them all, they all kind of go up and all are still kind of equal. So something to keep in mind, but math. Anyways, so yeah, so if you're so inclined, please join the Discord server and you can grab that. You can vote on that there. And in fact, I wanted this up because it's nice for me to be able to check that. Okay. Anyways, so that is that's kind of some housekeeping here for the channel and for maybe where we're going next year. All right. So let's start by making some geometry here. So let's do we'll do just a geo here. Maybe we'll just kind of just dive right into the sim. We'll say sim snow plow, because I have a feeling there's not going to be too much needed to set this up. Maybe what we can do is build the, we'll do sim snow, and I'll do a geometry and just say geo snow plow. So we'll do that. So this will be our actual snow plow here. This will be our simulation for the snow. So, just as a reminder too of how some of the base level stuff for Houdini works, these are objects, right? These are entire scene objects, right? At this level. Once we get in here, we're talking about geometry, and you can use some attributes to help define pieces and parts of things, but you're really not ever describing a single object at this level. At this level, at the object level, that's where you're actually describing things. That's why cameras live there. That's why the old, bone system and things like that used to live there for characters. So that is kind of the difference between these two nodes by just the way that they work, is that, or at these two different levels, and why we kind of have these nodes to hold on to these pieces of, our scene. So in this case, let's do this, and let's do a cylinder. Let's do that. No, that's right. It's a tube. It's a tube. So let's do this on the x-axis like so. I am going to do a match size. This match size, gosh, I'm using this so much more now. I just really, really like it. It's really helpful. Great little node here. All right, so we'll do that. And this will just kind of be the start of our snowplow shape here. So let's up the columns on this to maybe, we'll do 48 or something like that. And I think I'm just gonna, let's see. Let's do this. I'm just trying to think if there's a programmatic way to do this or just kind of go for it. Well, first of all, we probably need this a little higher. So snowplow's about the width of a lane. I don't know, how wide is a car? About 6 feet maybe. So like 5-6 feet. So maybe like 2 meters, we'll say. So we'll say the height is 2. So that'll be our snowplow there. I don't know if I'm right on that, but I'm just kind of guessing. I've got to be at least in the ballpark. So let's do that. And let's just go down here. Sure, I'll just select him, I guess. I'm going to turn off this just back face kind of visibility here, so we're not selecting through this. And let's take it maybe from here. I'll just kind of actually change this over to the brush selection. I kind of like that better when I'm making these long kind of wide selections here. Yep, that looks good. Doesn't need to go all the way over to the top. Maybe a couple back like that will be good. Cool. I'm going to delete that. So maybe there's the front end of our snowplow. I mean, there's a million different ways to do these things, obviously, in Houdini. I'm just kind of going to go do this kind of the simplest way I can think of. Cool. That looks good. Let me, I'm going to take half of these. Let's do number 2 for selection. Let's just take one of these sides here. Yeah. And we'll just do, I'm just going to do a simple edit on these, do a scale, and I'm going to right click and say, sorry. Yeah. So I'm going to align the handle to the world. No, honestly, I mean, there is a little bit of a benefit to it. Yeah, so the one thing that can be beneficial to separating the two is to be able to animate at that level, right? So when you're animating at this level here, right, you're just adding a transform. You're just adding a transform onto this whole object, right? There's actually no deforming geometry going on in here. If you do an animation at this level, you're kind of transforming the geometry or deforming all the points more so. So there can be some beneficial things there. If you're doing something pretty lightweight like what we're doing here, it's not going to make a huge difference, right? But there can be some benefits to it. I mostly do it for organization, but I mean, yeah, there's certainly positives and negatives to doing it each way. So Houdini will let you do just about, any workflow you can think of, right? So, playing around with just kind of different ways of doing things. Obviously there's going to be some positives and negatives. A lot of times you'll see like, object transform or something to that effect, where it'll say like use transforms or don't use transforms on the object. That really usually means using the transforms from that object. If you've animated something, are you using those transforms when you're going through your scene or whatever, going through a simulation or something like that. That's pretty common with like collision objects and things like that in DOPS. So it's pretty common. One second, I just want to bring something up here for myself because I don't think I ever set my camera settings. There we go. Sorry. Just another little housekeeping thing here. Okay. Anyways, so I'm going to do selection 2. Let's select all these guys, and I'm going to change this to a box selection. It's a little easier to grab them all. Okay. So let's do this. I'm going to this, I think, and if we do that, turn our snap on, I should be able to move this down here, and then turn off pivot mode. And now we've got that kind of centered down here. So I'll just scale these all down a little bit, not by too much. Maybe we'll say cool, something like that. So we've got a little bit of a, I know snowplows usually push off to one side like that. So I think something like that is how they're made. I can't remember exactly, but I think that's pretty close. Anyways, so let's do a, I'm just going to do this extrude volume. I think this should work pretty well for this case. Now, by default, it goes up and down. Excuse me, but we should be able to set this in Z, I think. So let's try that. There we go. Yep. So we can just have it kind of push back a little bit like that. We don't have to have it flatten the base, so we could do something like that, and we could have it work, something along that line. That's an option we could do. If you wanted to flatten the backside of it, you could. So it's like a big block. Could be maybe a little bit better just for testing, especially right now, just for collision detection and things like that. So that could actually be a little bit better. One thing I'm actually going to do as well is I'm going to break this up a little bit more before we extrude it. So there's a couple different ways you could do that. I'm just going to do it kind of the simplest way is just kind of, we can just bricker these real quick. So I'm going to turn off convex, just turn on bricker. And so what this is going to do is try to split it up. Oops, going the wrong way. I was going to give it a couple extra splits here. Really, this isn't the cleanest way of doing it, but I'm just going to kind of estimate it here and just kind of give it a few splits, and then we can extrude it. The other thing we could do is use the Labs Thicken node if you have Labs installed, which I recommend for everyone. You could also do that. As you see, that thickens it kind of in the direction of the normals basically on the object. So there's a difference between these two, right? So even if we turn off this flattened base here, you're getting this kind of push back to this geometry that's pushed back from the original. This is going to kind of give thickness on the top and bottom, maybe that you might not want, especially if this is going along the ground. You probably don't want this penetrating with the ground, or maybe you do for some reason, whatever. But yeah, so maybe we'll just go with this for now. And I'm going to flatten the base just to give it a nice thick edge here so that we're for sure getting some good clean, collisions hopefully with it, where it's not too thin where it could push right through the object. So we've got that. Let's just do a null here, or we could just do an output, because I'm always going to want this to output. Just a note too, if you ever see someone do a null like this, and say, okay, this is out, which I do this very often. This, you could, do whatever, and you can call to this, right? You can call this from other, from an object merge node, right? And select this and say, yep, give me that, whatever's happening at that point in the node tree. But this output just means that it's always going to be outputting for this object here. So even if we have our display flag set here, on this version, when we come back up, it's going to be that extruded version like that. So just something to keep in mind. That's the difference between those two nodes. So we could just keep it this way, and this will just be our output. We don't have to worry about this. And then we could actually just, since we know that that's where it's going to call from, we could do an object merge here and just grab could grab the entire snowplow object and say git plow, and I'm going to color that red. So now anything that we did in that's obviously coming into this geometry node. And what I can do as well here is I can come to this and change that to like that. Get back to, I'm hitting escape and then enter to bring back up this this handle. And let's just animate this a little bit. So we'll have it start there is fine. And I'll just alt click, put a keyframe down. Maybe we'll do like, I don't know, we won't go too crazy. Maybe 120 frames. I'll bring this down a little bit. We'll do this to like 144 or something. So we'll have it go maybe 10 meters or something like that. Sure. Have it go a little further than that maybe, and have it, we'll have it go 10 meters, but it'll stop there. We'll hit Alt. And yeah, so what we're seeing here is that both of these objects, we're seeing both the snowplow and the geometry that was inside of this sim snow, because I've merged it in there. So if we turn this off, turn this on, you see that's not moving, right? So what we're doing there is we're transforming it into this object, into specified object, right? So what we want to do is transform it into this object, and that should keep the motion here. I actually thought that was the default before, but maybe it's, yeah, maybe it is into this object is what we wanted to do. And that's basically going to bring that transform into this object here. So we're actually getting that transformation right here. So that should work just fine. And even now, if we had both these selected, they would just be on top of each other. Wouldn't be anything happening there. So either way, I'm going to turn off this ghosting just so I can, see what's happening here. So we've got our plow here. So let's make some snow that this is going to plow out of its way. So let's do, let's make a box basically that's going to exist where we want this snow to be, right? So let's just do a simple box. And we can kind of set this up in some way that will be helpful. Maybe we'll do, I don't know, maybe 5 meters will be fine. That'll give us a little extra on the outsides here to play with. And we probably don't need it super thick. A meter would be pretty crazy amount of snow, I would say. So, yeah, we'll do, I'll just do this at 0.5. Oops, 0.5. And let's take the top of this down a little bit. And we'll set this. Oh, I've got the snap on still, so I'm going to turn that off so it's not trying to snap to that geometry. So, sure, maybe something like that. 1/4 meter for right now will be good. And we'll just stretch this out, kind of move this back. I'm just going to use these handles for right now just to kind of get a sense of where I want this to be. We'll bring this out to 10 roughly here. And then what I'm going to do here is just put down a match size and make sure that this is on the ground plane here. And actually, I'm going to ghost this again and make sure this is on just so we can actually see it in here. So we'll see that is ghosted in there. And then for these other justify X and justify Z, I'm just going to turn those off. So this is just snapping that down to the ground plane. And I can offset this up and down a little bit if I wanted to as well, which is really nice. So you can get some really fine control with this match size. So, okay, so there's our grid that we're going to make of snow. Maybe maybe 5 might be a little bit too much. Let's bring that to like just 4.5. Cool. Okay, so let's do a Vellum grain, figure grain. If you see the grain pieces, that has to do with the rigid body kind of shape matching that they're doing these days. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, that the Vellum shape match has to do with the kind of quasi rigid bodies in Vellum. So we're just going to say setup. We'll just say Vellum snow. So this is going to be setting up the grains. So if we look at this here and say create points from volume, that's going to create them just like that. And we can do this, a couple different ways. Obviously, the sphere packing is going to be a little bit different. It's going to try to pack these in a little kind of in a more irregular fashion. And as we turn up this point count, right, it's going to allow it maybe to pack in a little bit more. And so this one is a little bit trickier with as far as trying to do something like super dense like this. So I'm going to just go with the regular grid in this case, and we can do a little bit of a jitter on it. That'll help. Warnings. Okay. It's interesting. Get some warnings. Give me a second here. There we go. All right, so this is a little bit better way of doing some of that irregular stuff. Obviously, the particles are a little too big. So yeah, we're getting something going on here. And we can turn up or down that jitter scale as we might desire. Great. I'm just double checking these here. Dither surface is just going to make this surface a little bit more kind of irregular, and just, especially if it's like curved or whatever, it's going to help out with that a little bit. But in this case, not going to be a huge difference because it's flat. So let's do that. Let's take the particle size down just a little bit. Maybe something like that. Just for now, we'll test this out, kind of see how it's going. Okay, so there's our grains, right? We're going to give it a little bit of a traction weight here just to help out with it. And we'll just leave that for right now. Hopefully that'll help with the clumping. And yeah, that should be good. So let's do a Vellum solver. Down. I'm going to put the ground position on here. This is just displaying that this is the ground plane. It does go infinite in all directions. I'm going to turn that off just for right now. And the other thing we're going to want to add into here is this collision geometry. So this can go into this first input. And if we look here at the sim again, you can see that sure enough, there is our there's our collision geometry for that. For the snowplow. So here's another thing we're going to turn up a little bit. I'm just going to set this to, let's just do it to 0.1 for right now. I think that should be good there, just to give us a little bit of scale, because this should be scaling based on that. It says waiting for how much the particles will naturally stick together. Value 0 will disable particle clumping. So we need to set it a little bit. So I'll just give it a little at first, and then we'll kind of boost it up from there. I'm going to up this to 48,000 megabytes. Great. All right, let's see what we get going on here, and we can go from there. All right, getting somewhere. I'm going to turn this down. So a couple things here. We're getting a lot of kind of bouncy particles and things like that. A little bit maybe too bouncy. One thing I was actually just noticing is I feel like this mass is a little low. So I'm going to set this up to maybe 1 just to try that out and see what happens here. Yep, that definitely feels a little less bouncy. Let's give that a shot. Cool. All right. The other thing I might actually need to do is, now that I'm looking at this, I feel like it's actually maybe the snowplow's a little too fast, maybe. But that's okay. We'll keep playing around with this a little bit. All right, let's turn the traction weight up a little bit. We'll go maybe to a quarter, see what happens there. See how this all works. Another thing that we should probably do in order to get just a little more stability here is up the substeps. I'm just going to bring those up a little bit. Maybe add in a little bit of constraint iterations. These are all things to help with the stability of your simulation. So let's do that. See kind of where we get here with this. Oh yeah. Now it's too attractive, right? So it's always something kind of good to keep in mind that upping these substeps and constraint iterations will change the look of this considerably, right? So sometimes you're like, oh man, I really need to up this or that, right? But now we can see, oh geez, it's actually too, like how it slides at the end there. It's actually probably too, too sticky. So there's certainly a lot of stuff there to keep in mind when you're working with grains, for instance. So, so we can actually turn that back down. Set that to 0.1. What's the other thing I turned up? Anything? No, I don't think so. Let me set this back and just see if that helps us at all here. Let's see where that gets us. Yep, this is starting to do its thing. The only thing I'm actually going to change is I feel like I want this snowplow to be a little bit taller. It feels a little too small. So I'm going to make it a little bigger. So let's change the radius of this to be a bit bigger, maybe like 1.75. Yeah, maybe something like that. Maybe just 1.5. And I might make it a little taller. Maybe we'll do 2.5, something like that. It just feels like that's going to be a little bit better. And then we can probably edit this and just change the scale on this one side. Maybe this will help push it a little bit more one way or the other. Oh, that's right. Another thing that they often do is they will... That's right. I forgot. Let's put a transform down here. If we rotate this just slightly, that should give us some of what we're looking for here, because there should be kind of a leading edge like that. So that should be good. That should still work to some extent. Yeah, it's fine. It's not going to be great. That's offset, unfortunately, but no problem. And then this should extrude back still. So maybe a little funky there, but nothing too crazy. Oh, you know what? That is interesting, because these front edges here are now acting a little different. So let's just maybe we'll just bring this back a little bit in this direction here, just something like that, just to make sure it's a little bit more clean geometrically. Cool. Yeah, that's good. And then I'll say -10, just to make it nice and even. Great. And make this a little wider as well. Cool. All right, so let's see how that looks. See where that gets us. And I'm also going to turn off the collision geometry here. We don't need to see that. And yeah, now you can actually see one thing that's kind of interesting that changed with that is that this side is much cleaner here, and this side is now kind of this a little bit rougher edge, because it's kind of leaving some of this behind, right? So some of this snow is getting kind of like left behind here, right? So that's already doing a little bit of what I'm hoping it would do. Let's turn this down a little bit too, just to make sure we're not overly attracting all these particles together, because they should be attracting, but not, stuck together like some sort of, Phloem or something like. I don't know if anybody knows what phloem is. Jeez, just realizing that. And so, this is definitely starting to do some of what I was hoping it would do. The only thing I was really thinking would be nice is for it to kind of make a little. I mean, it's doing more or less what I'm thinking it should have done, so that's good. Let's scale the top of this box just down a little bit, so maybe we're not dealing with such a thick layer of particles. And if we turn this down as well a little bit to maybe like 0.65, yeah, let's go a little crazy. We'll do 0.5, something like that. I mean, still, it's not the crazy number of points. So let's do that, and we'll see where this kind of gets us. Yeah, it's a little bit more of what I was kind of thinking it should be doing, so that's good. Let's do this too. Let's see if we can set some friction on these. Not sure if this is going to be any different. So what I'm going to do real quick is just set up our little camera here, just so we can kind of watch what's going on and see how this sim is kind of progressing here. Pull this over just a little bit, just so we have a little bit better viewer here to render from. All right, cool. And let's just flip book this. This is at the, well, first of all, I'll turn this off and we'll just get kind of a baseline here. So let's check this out. We'll let this go. Actually, probably should have gone a little wider there. Just redo this just a touch wider here. So I kind of want to see that end, that end little bit there, how much that slides, because that's going to tell me a lot about, how this friction is kind of affecting it. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, comments, why am I doing something a certain way? Is there a better way? Is this a better way of doing it? Please let me know. Happy to kind of hear thoughts from anybody here. Not gonna go and say that, oh, this is the only way you could do X, Y, or Z. I try to always hopefully present some of these things that way. So just if you guys have any questions, thoughts, comments, whatever, please put them in the chat. I'd love to hear what you're thinking and kind of, go from there and be able to have a little bit of a conversation back and forth. So, yeah. All right. So it looks like we've got some stuff going on here. So that's good. Looks pretty stable. Let's just add in some friction here. Let's add a little bit more just to make it more obvious in case we're not seeing it here. Let's just, oh, wait a second. That's right. I forgot to do the magic thing here of hitting the little button at the top there. So I will do that again and start it over. This little button up at the top makes different sequences. So you can set different sequences here. This little star. How would you add noise to the attraction weight? Sure. It's a great question. Yeah, if you added noise to the attraction weight, I'm guessing that's an attribute. Let me once this sim goes, I'll take a look at it and see what that looks like. Yeah, that's definitely a pretty significant difference here between the two, as far as like that with this kind of slide happening here, and then this is with the friction on, and we're getting kind of this like real spray thing happening there because I'm assuming that friction is kind of throwing things around against each other a little bit more. So it's interesting. It's kind of creating more of these particles kind of flying around as well. It's actually making for a bit of a messier simulation. I might not want it quite that high maybe, but I'm going to turn it to 0.25 just to give it a little bit of friction there. So yeah, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, that's a great question, KG. Let's take a look at that because it's, if I'm thinking correctly, it should be an attribute. So like these here are parameters, right? So on the geometry, there should be some sort of attribute here. So let's take a look. I have my geometry spreadsheet kind of hidden down here. So let's take a look here. So we have our Vellum snow, and sure enough, here's our traction weight right here, right? So this is our attribute on the points here. So each of these points has this attraction weight. So what I'm going to do is just pull this off to the side just so you can see what's going on here. So yeah, so with Vellum, right, we've got 3 different streams coming out here. This is our geometry, this is our constraints, this is our collisions. So for something like grain, there really shouldn't be any real constraints. So if we look at this here, it should actually be basically just the points. You know, it's not really going to say much of anything. If we go through these different attributes here, it's basically just, there's not anything. So kind of not unnecessary, but not super important in this case. But it creates a nice workflow here, and we can port this collision in here, and that just kind of flows down into this collision geometry input. So the real kind of meat of what's going on here is in this stream here. So if we just look at this stream by itself, which you can do by selecting this and making sure that you're on your geometry. So you could switch over to the constraints, switch over to the collisions, right? So in this case, we're looking at geometry, and this will be the same here. We're just kind of isolating it so that nothing is really needing to be selected or whatever. So anyways, we have this, we have our attraction weights there. What we could do, and I'll turn off these just so that they're points and we can maybe visualize it a little bit better. But so there is all of the points. I'm going to turn this off actually because I actually like to keep that camera the way it is right there probably. Yep. Okay. So anyways, let's look at these. So we've got these points here. If we hover over, hit the eye, we can look at attraction weight, right? They're all even at this point. So let's look at adding some float. So let's do attribute adjust float, and we can add this in here. This is right now set to P scale, but we can change this to traction weight, just like that. And so in this case, the operation is set to add. If we set initial or set always is going to make sure that it's, you know, in this case, always being set to 0. What we're going to do, let's do multiply. All right, because that could probably help us out the most. And let's do this with some noise, maybe. Could be good. Let's see how that goes. So let's do 0.5 for the minimum value to multiply it, and 2 for the maximum. So it can be a lot more clumpy or less clumpy. So now if we come down here, we should see that this attribute is now getting noised up quite a bit. We can change the element size here, bring it down quite a bit like that. And what we can do is do some, hey Jamal, how you doing? Welcome to the stream. We can do this uniform with outliers as well, which is going to give us some of these kind of real extreme values that are going to be in there as well. So we could maybe play around with that, see how that works, just to break it up even a little bit more. And so we've got our noise here. You can change this between different types, Perlin, simplex, all these different things. You could animate it, but in this case, we don't want it to animate because that would be confusing and weird. So let's just do it like this. So this will give us, some of those clumps built in maybe, that you were kind of mentioning there. And what we can do, there's a bunch of different things we could do here. We can enable post-processing and things like that. We could also do a, some sort of a fitting function afterwards to kind of push them more or less into, stronger or weaker constraints. So we could do another attribute adjust float and drop this down. And let's just say this we'll do add tracked noise like that. Sorry, I need to mute my phone. I just heard it making some crazy noises here. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So, okay, so we're adding the attraction noise here, and then here we can say remap attract. So what we can do here is I'll just copy the same attraction weight here. Should be able to do remap attribute. And so here we could say the minimum value is 0, the maximum is 2, just for example. And we could set this to kind of remap that attribute again. And so here, source attribute we'll just say is going to be the same as the destination. So there's the attraction weight. Yeah, that's fine. We'll set the same thing here so that we're working on, 0 to 2 in both of these cases. That should be right. That is clamping it though. That's interesting. Sorry, I'm just looking here to see if this is going over or not. Okay, let's do that. We'll just change it to be so we'll just, we can just compute the range here actually. So that's fine. We'll do that. Oh, we don't want to add. That's right. So we just want to set always. That's fine. We can just do that. That was what I was doing. It was adding that on top of it. So that was why it was coming up with these weird values, but you can compute the range right there. So that's great. All right, great. So here I'm just going to select these, twirl this down. So I shift clicked on both of those. I'm going to change them to B-spline just to kind of make it a little bit of a smoother spline function here. So we could do something like this where we kind of make it into this, kind of S curve type thing like this where we're getting, more values at each side maybe. So it's going to be going, in this case, maybe it stays in the middle a little bit more, or we could change it the other way where it's going to be, like this, where it's going to be kind of at the extremes. Maybe that's even a little bit better. Something more like this, where it's going to, some are going to be really weak and other ones are going to be really strong clumping. So kind of play around with this in a multitude of different ways. Maybe we'll just give it a little extra contrast there and we'll throw it into this Vellum solver. I'm going to turn these displays back on just so that we get a little bit of a nicer thing there. And I'm going to turn are you going to convert the grain into a mesh? No, actually, you know what? I don't find that to be the best way of working with the snow that I've done in the past. Yeah, I don't find that to personally be the best way of doing it. I mean, you could, but I feel like actually rendering snow as like a combination of like, like a volumetric type situation, I think is a much nicer way of looking at it because it gives it some of that displacement and also gives it the ability to be a lot more particly, more of a particle nature to it. So that's kind of what I've noticed is better when we've done rendering. So, So yeah, so now some of these. I saw maybe said I saw both before, but I don't know, maybe rest P then transform. Transfer the remesh geo. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's ways to do it for sure. I mean, oh, my camera stopped working. That's weird. Hold on a second, guys. My looks like my camera freaked out on me here. Give me 1 second. Interesting. 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 Hmm. All right, I guess this will be a camera-free rest of my stream here. That's kind of strange. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, so it can be a little bit maybe heavier in some ways, right? For doing the volume. But yeah, so it's it's tough, kind of tough to say. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tweak these parameters a little bit. Maybe we'll turn this down just a little bit. And we've got the attraction weight there at 0.5. Let's do maybe 0.75. In fact, I'm going to do another thing here. I'm just going to change. Nope, nope, nope. That's fine. All right, let's let this sim here for a second. The other thing, just thinking about this, is maybe this should be a little bit more stiff like this. Like it should be a little bit more extreme. So these values are kind of really hitting one side or the other. Let's see how that works. Oh yeah, I just realized another thing. Probably want that to be linear, not speeding up. Whoops. Let's do that. Let's just shift click that. Grab this, change it to linear. And yeah, maybe actually. Sorry. Shift click this again. And maybe we'll just adjust some of these here. Maybe this should go to 168 and we'll change this to 144 like that. Just slow it down a little bit. It might be just going too fast. Sorry. Cool. All right, let's see how this looks. Yeah, that's feeling quite a bit more. Yeah. Now we're getting somewhere here. Let me actually maybe bring this back just a little bit more so that we're not. Cool. All right, I'll show you something real quick here that I'd worked on before that we did with the with that volume just pull it up here. Give me 1 second. All right, here it is. So this was the project that we had worked on. It's maybe a little overblown here, but we had done this for doing. This is all like simmed snow and things like that for the mountain. It looks like the compression actually did a number on this one, but that was with that method for for doing the volumes for snow and things like that. So worked out pretty well. And then you just add in, the dust kind of blowing around that volume as well. So that was what we had done. No problem for the explanation, man. The attributes for it are, that's really kind of the whole idea with something like Vellum, right? Is that you're able to use all these attributes on here, right? Because, when we're bringing these in, there's mass, p-scale, if it's grain is even an attribute, the friction is an attribute. So you could change all of those things totally on the fly, or not on the fly, but just, in some sort of parameter-based way, where you could kind of build in these different things. You could even use proximity to other geometry to make it more or less sticky or anything like that. So there's a lot of options really there. So maybe let's look at it from this side, maybe instead of at this camera angle. We already know kind of what the friction's doing, but let's grab this and we'll bring it over to here. Let's just kind of look at what specifically this snow is doing as it's kind of going through this. I'm going to close this out. Those are fine. Let's just start a new one up here and we'll take a look at what this noise attribute is kind of doing in there, right? We'll see how so this is the one with the attribute in, and then we'll look at what it looks like without the attribute as well. Okay, cool. That looks good. So let's now make it all even, and I can just turn these right off. We'll add in a new one here and start up this, and we'll take a look at what this. Oops. So I have this highlighted here, so that's why you're seeing those white. It's just seeing that. Let's do this and see what the difference looks like here. So the other really nice thing about doing these as separate sequence is if we look at the sequence list here, we can have this one here that you can use as like a difference between the two. I can already kind of see the difference here. It's kind of just looks like a big pile. So if we look at the compare images here and we just let this kind of do its thing, we can actually change, kind of do like a split screen difference here between the two. So the left side is going to be the more, the one with all the attributes on it. And the right side is kind of the steady, everything has the same attribute kind of value or attraction weight, value. So let's take a look at this maybe at this point here. We can take a look at this and say, okay, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like with the... That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Sorry. So this is what it looks like with maybe the noisier attraction weight on it. And then when we look at this next one here, this is without it. And so, yeah, it just looks quite a bit smoother here, right? Just looks like it's pretty smooth kind of going across there. Yeah, it's just kind of a smoother pile happening here. And that's obviously quite a bit noisier. You can even tell too, kind of when this falls here, like at the very beginning here, when it kind of settles, this settles like so much more evenly than this version here. You can see just the difference right there between the two. So that's something obviously to keep in mind as well. Let's see here what happens if we let's leave that, and let's just go in here and we'll just up the attraction weight in here. We'll double it right there just to see what happens. So these are both scaling against each other, so it's a little tricky. You can kind of set these multiple places. If this is set to 0, obviously that means there's no attraction anywhere. So just something to keep in mind. But let's just flip book this again, take a look at it, see kind of what this does for us. Oh, I have those off. So this is just more attraction, all the same value. So that's not really what I wanted to see, but we'll let it flip book real quick anyways. So the way that you would go about doing that, the volumetric, setup is to do the volume rasterize attributes is kind of the quickest way to be able to just do that and get those into a volume. You could also do, I think there's like a volume from particles. There's a few different ways you can do it. But yeah, those are all good options for bringing those in. So we'll just turning it into a VDB, right, is going to be a good way to, get this to work. So now you can see this is much stickier kind of thing going on here, but it's all equal. So let's turn these back on because those are really going to help out, I think, a lot. All right, so now let's take a look at that, see what happens here. Yeah, and hopefully this will all look a lot more broken up here than it did previously in this last thing. And sure enough, it looks quite a bit smoother there. And there we're getting a lot more breakup in those areas. And we can obviously push that as well, right? So like we can make those values go further if we wanted to. So we could have it really attracted in some places and really not attracted in others. So we could actually turn both of those things down, right, or up. So like, for example, right now we have these values set here, right? So we've got these kind of incoming values from the attribute that we're remapping, which are 0.25 and 1.5. And what we could do instead is go here, and these are the output values, and we could say, all right, let's go way down to 0.1, and let's go up to like 3 on this. So this is going to be way stronger now. It's going to be more kind of contrasty between the two. So let's take a look at what that looks like and see maybe how that changes things as well. So yeah, now we're getting some big chunks that kind of all want to stay together, some that are going to be moving apart. Now this is starting to look a little less like snow, but we're getting these like different clumping kind of values going on here. So hopefully you can see how these are going to kind of push these different attributes around in a multitude of different ways, right? This is obviously going to be a much different simulation like this than it would be with it just something all uniform across, right? So that is how that's looking. Let's bring this down to maybe 2.25 because that might be something a little bit more interesting. And let's just look at these values actually again. If I turn that on, sure enough, yep, there they are. So just so I know what's going on here, I'm going to right click and go to edit. So red is going to be full, blue is going to be kind of the low end of things here, or purple. So let's just see what we can do here to kind of push this around a little bit more. Probably don't want so many clumps that are that big. So let's maybe do something like, I don't know, something more like that, just to maybe give it a little bit more of the non clumped. And I'm going to bring this up a little bit too, because I don't really want those to be totally just free flying with no no attraction. So let's do that. Yeah, let's take a look at what that looks like. So we'll go back to this cam 1 here and turn this off. That should go back. Yep, cool. All right, let's take one more look at this, and then we can kind of keep going from there. Does anybody have any, questions about how these things are working or what's kind of happening here? Anything at all, just to kind of, clarify some of these different things that are going on basically in this scene. It's kind of funny, like you're actually getting like this like wave pattern here. Now I'm like really curious, like, is this something that actually happens when they're plowing? Like, now I'm like want to go out and watch them plow and see if this like there's like a wave kind of pattern that's happening here. It's really kind of fascinating. Um Hey, Ruben. Hey, sorry to go off topic, but how do you fill a cup with fluid, flip or vellum? Um, yeah, there's reasons to do it both ways, right? Flip is always going to be a little bit better for um, larger scale simulations, and vellum usually will be better for smaller scale simulations. So, I mean, I don't think it's that far off topic. We are talking vellum here, and vellum is a fluid solver as well. Um, there could be reasons to do it either way. I would say if you're going to be up, I think if it's small scale, I might try vellum these days just because it's a little like it gives you a kind of another option. But flip, if you use the SOP flip fluids, and I think I actually did, I did a video about this that you might want to go back and look at. But there's actually there's a way that you can set up a water line for filling up a cup, for example. So it'll make sure that the pressure fills up to that certain point if you're filling it, from within, or if it's from above, that works a little differently. But it's kind of like if you had like an emitter inside of something, it's like gives you a way to set a water line where like the pressure equalizes at that certain point and it stops right there. And that's what the new SOP flip fluids. So it's probably worth experimenting with both, because the flip solver is going to be a much better solver in some ways. It has so much more kind of controls and things like that, I feel like, that you can do with it. But when you're talking about small scale stuff, sometimes flip is a bit overkill as far as how much you have to do to make it work, because the scale at small scale can get real funky. So I might try starting with vellum, and then going to flip if you're not getting the results you want with it. But also, if you look at Tim, I think his name's Tim Van Helsing or something to that effect. There was a let's see. Yep, here. I can't say his last name, but Side Effect Snacks V2. He actually goes into doing some flip, I believe this is all in Vellum. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in some flip type stuff, that might be a good place to take a look. So just something to keep in mind. But anyways, yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a great question. Anyways, yeah, now I'm like really curious to see if like snowplows when they're plowing do this kind of stuff. And hopefully, I forget who asked that. KG, hopefully this is like what you were thinking of kind of when you were thinking of adding it, where you're getting this kind of churning kind of feel to it versus just this solid kind of pushing wall type thing. That to me, especially just from somebody who lives in a very cold climate, feels more akin to what snow is actually doing. You'd have to kind of play around with it, because if you know snow, it gets wetter, it gets drier. Sometimes it acts like a powder. Sometimes it acts like, yeah, no problem, Ruben. Glad to kind of give you a little explanation there. So there's something to keep in mind for sure. with the wetness kind of it. And that's the idea here with the attraction weight, is kind of saying how wet is it kind of clumping together. So, yeah. So I think that's starting to kind of do what I would hope it would do. The only thing is maybe the friction is a little too high. Let me just look at that real quick. Yeah, okay. I see what you're saying. A bit more like RBD. Yeah. I mean, in my experience, that's not usual. Like my personal experience and just kind of thinking about the way it would look, I don't feel like that's usually the look of it unless it's this like compacted ice. And I really do think, I think you're right. I think it's very much, it very much depends on the situation, because like if a plow is plowing up ice, that is something way different, right, than if it's plowing up wet or dry snow, right? Those are kind of two separate things. Like if you're trying to pick up big blocks of ice, then yeah, that's going to act a bit more like an RBD sim. And what I would probably do there is something, do an RBD sim of it first, and then have it source debris off of it, and do kind of a particle sim after that, after the fact. So if you're looking for more of that chunky ice kind of look, then yeah, I would think something a bit more like that. It really, snow and is a really tricky thing because you're in that state change world, right? I'm just remembering you can't see me because my camera is freaked out. So that's too bad. Anyways, but yeah, snow is in kind of that state change world where it's, it'll show up either as like a more wet kind of fluidy thing. There's kind of this grain nature to it, but then there's also that ice where it becomes almost like a solid and breaks up in that kind of rigid body type way. So it is tricky for sure. I mean, depending on where in that state you want to kind of simulate it, it'll change a bit. If you look at a really good example of doing, well, first of all, in that Side Effect Snacks, he actually does an ice smash here as well. And so that is something interesting to think about. There's actually a smash of ice and snow and things in there. So that might be maybe a little bit more of what you're thinking. So that might be a good resource for you as well for that. But the other thing, oh, was I just thinking? Shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. The other thing to think about too is if you want a really good example of like huge scale stuff, check out the behind the scenes from like Frozen 2. There was a whole scene where she's like battling the waves and stuff, and she's shooting these big chunks of these like big ice magic things. That's a really good example of some rigid body ice dynamics and things like that. So, maybe take a look at that as well, and that'll give you a good, a good sense of maybe what that should look like or could look like. So there we go. I got it reworking. Yay, I'm back. Anyways, just gesture with my hands so much. I feel like if you don't see what I'm doing, sometimes I'm like, I feel like I'm just, I don't know, whatever. Anyways, so yeah, that's another great example of it. So one thing that you might want to do with something like this, and I'm going to maybe just set this back down just a little bit. Oh, I'll just do it to 2. We'll do that. Is, you might want to add some dust or something like that kicking up from it. So that's kind of an interesting option as well. So let's think about maybe how we could go about doing that as from something like this. So I'm gonna maybe make this simulation just a little bit um, a little bit heavier maybe. I'll do this. I'm going to set this down just a little bit too. I feel like the friction's a little high for some reason. I don't know why. All right, let's set this to maybe 0.435. Let's do that. And I'm going to just let this kick off for a second, see kind of how it's going here. It's still simming at a decent speed, not anything too crazy, but so the one nice thing with this is that our noise, because we're setting it based on, or our kind of breaking up of this is going to be set via noise. So those patterns should, that we set in there should stay, more or less scale, independent, right? They should still be in those same kind of patterns in these grains that we were working with here, right? So if we go here, turn this on, we'll see that we've got the same kind of size situation here. But I'm going to turn this back up because it felt like it was actually kicking around a bit more than I wanted it to. So let's see here. Let's just see how this goes. Probably make a sequence here. All right, we'll let that go for a second and just make sure that there's nothing too crazy going on here. Ooh. That's weird. It's like exploding on us here. Well, that's really strange. That might be the friction, maybe. Maybe I should have left it up. That's really strange. Huh. We lost all stability. Oh, it could also be the I might need to up some of these solver settings as well. When you get more grains, more cloth, more collisions, more layers on top of each other, things like that, often you have to up the substeps in there in the constraint iterations in order to get a more stable sim. So let me just try this again here. Let me put this back to what it was just to make sure it's not that. I have a feeling it's not. A feeling I just need to up the substeps. But we'll see. We'll give it a second here and let it do its thing. Yeah, so kill that over there. Hopefully this isn't a runaway simulation again. So part of, I think, why this is actually turning into that runaway simulation as I'm thinking about this more and more is because, yep, it's definitely still doing it. Okay, so let's up these a little bit here. I'll bring that up to 5 and maybe we'll give it 200 here. Just to give it a good amount. See if that gives us a nice stable result. So part of what we're seeing here is the amount of piling that's happening there, right? Because we've got so many particles here that are now sitting on top of each other, it's trying to calculate all of those collisions and things like that. And when it's that deep, it's going to inherently run into some issues with figuring out what collision should be happening in there. And that's why you're getting some of these particles that are just shooting off like that and kind of creating these crazy kind of rogue particles or whatever, rogue velocities that shouldn't be existing in there. So upping substeps, upping constraint iterations, things like that, they are obviously more compute intensive, but it should give us a much, much more stable result than this craziness here. So let's take a look at what this is doing. Yeah. Man, that's crazy looking. So, it's an unfortunate thing of just like, as you get more and more, I guess there's a good A/B of what the before and after was. Before. I'm just writing over them. That's why it's kind of, you're seeing that previous simulation, but obviously we're in a much more stable state here than we were previously. So, yeah, so that's looking pretty nice. Getting a nice look here. Things are kind of, it literally makes me laugh every time it pops over to it. That's so funny. Yeah. All right, cool. So what I think we're going to do is isolate some of these particles based on maybe their speed, if they're colliding, things like that. We can get some of those attributes from the simulation and calculate which one should be. Can never understand which of those iteration values to tweak and why I'm tweaking them. Yeah, it's a great point. Actually, when this is, I can just stop it right now. That's fine. I know this is going to work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put down the Vellum IO node, which is going to cache all these things to disk. And I'm just going to say, instead of geo, I'm going to call this sim. That's going to put that in that folder. And I'm just going to save this to disk in background, which is going to run a top network inside of here. It's actually going to kick off another session of Houdini in the background and simulate this for us. So I'm going to let that go, let it start caching. There we go. Great. So now it's doing its thing in the background, and Houdini is still completely on its own, doing its own thing, and we can let that simulate in the background. So great. All right. So you're saying, why am I changing some of these things? Why am I not changing them? So here is where the help system comes in really well. And I know that this can be really like a daunting thing for some people, but 9 times out of 10, this help system, even though it's all text and it's so dry sometimes, is going to just give you so many good reasons to, understand how these things are working in here. So let's take a look at, for example, in the solver, right? So here, constraint iterations, right? Within each substep, this number of passes will be taken by the constraint enforcement operations, which means every, this is the number of passes that the constraints will do each frame, right? So each frame, it's going to do 200 constraint iterations 5 times and make sure that those things are all being satisfied properly. So, so that is saying here, stiff constraints can require more iterations to converge. So that's something to think about. Is it a really stiff object that you're working with? It says here, a good starting point is the diameter of the geometry, the number of edges between the farthest points. So like if you're using cloth, they're saying that is a great, thing to think of here, right? Like are there 200 constraint or 200 points between each side of your object, maybe if you're working with cloth? So they give you some kind of tips there. Here's another thing. The default substeps can be very aggressive. Usually if the Vellum solver is too stretchy, raising substeps to 2 or 5 is a good first start. Again, this is a little bit to do with cloth, but it is saying like, yeah, probably 2 is a good starting point, honestly. For speed, 1 is going to happen, but that's something to keep in mind there too. Then there's smoothing iterations here. So like the default of 10 passes helps smooth out error, but might need to be increased if the overall constraint iterations are high. So there you see there's a correlation between those two. Some of these are really good as well here, like this post-collision passes. It says here, thus a final cleanup pass can achieve these requirements. We have found that number of stacked layers plus 2 is a good estimate for this number. So that can be another thing too, that if you have a lot of, things stacking on top of each other, that will allow it to properly, solve those constraints at the bottom. So there's some of those things to keep in mind as well. So, anyways, actually, that's really funny. I think this is doing 240. That's all right. Whatever. it's not really a big deal. It's just going to be happening in the background. So take a look at some of these things. They can be a little dry, but if you run into any problems with them, you can always post, what exactly those things mean on our Discord server, for example, and we can try to talk through those and try to make a little bit better sense of what those might mean. So, never, please, if you're not on Discord, I'd love for everybody to be able to kind of use that as a place to talk through issues and talk through, maybe problems that they're having. Anything like that is totally free game. And I definitely pay pretty close attention to the Discord. So that is something I try to keep, pretty close attention to. Also, if you ever have any suggestions for stream topics, we have a poll that's going on right now in the Discord. I think I showed that earlier. But if you have any thoughts of like, hey, this would be a really cool stream topic, that would be great. So you can go in and put that in the topic suggestions area. I know some people have done that already, and I really appreciate it because I've said this before. I know what I want to learn about and do, but that's not always what everybody else wants to learn and do. So, I want this to be kind of collaborative in that way. So, because if it's just me talking and doing my own thing, it's not that interesting. It's maybe not that fun. So, all right. So it looks like we've got this whole simulation here. Everything's doing its thing. We've got the snow moving around, doing all that kind of stuff. Great. So what I'm thinking here is let's now take this and add in some dust from these particles, right? So we've got a bunch of attributes here. So let's just look and see what kind of attributes we've kept here. In fact, we can look at this Vellum solver as well. This is going to have some other, since we have this all cached in here, this is going to have some other, and so there's some interesting things here, like hit number, for example. Now this actually isn't saving that, which is kind of a little bit of a bummer. Now, so the reason that, just if you haven't heard this explained before, the reason that you wouldn't want to save, like, for example, all of these vellums, like all of these 30-point attributes, is that this is going to make a bigger cache when you save those points to disk. So when you save these to disk, there's this save filter that's happening here, and it's making sure that certain things aren't getting saved, right? So in this case, it's not saving any of the hit attributes. It's also so it's deleting fallback, hit, overlap, air resistance, force, target velocity, old P, last, previous, like all of these different things in here. It's getting rid of. So what we can look at here is if there's anything maybe that we do want to keep, we could always recache that. So let's just look here and see if there's anything that might be helpful. The one thing that I'm noticing kind of right off the bat from this Vellum solver is that there is some hit attributes, right? So for example, here there's a hit number, right? So let's just kind of look at that. Let's isolate some of these. So let's just do this. Let's do a blast node just to see what's happening here. This is just purely just out of curiosity. So we're gonna do at hit num is greater than 0. So this should keep only, and I'll set this to be points. So these should only be points that have hit num greater than 0. And we're going to say delete non-selected. All right. So these are the points that have, okay. So one interesting thing I'm noticing already is that these are on the ground right now, right? So that's kind of curious. It's interesting. We're not getting the collision with this object here, which is with our collider, which I'm actually kind of surprised by. That seems a little odd to me, but kind of interesting. I mean, it's an interesting thing to have, right? To be able to just pull that out, but that's not really going to give us anything that we really Yeah, sorry, KG, I didn't see your last message, but yeah, basically evaluating your sim, figuring out what needs more or less passes. Yeah, exactly. So some sims don't need as many constraint iterations, some might not need as many substeps, some might just need some collision cleanup, things like that. Yeah, it's definitely a per case basis. But all right, so hit number is not going to really do maybe what we were hoping for. That's okay. Let's see if there's anything else here. Hit position. Mm, okay, that's probably going to be fine then. So what we're going to do instead of this, we'll just leave that as is. We'll use this Vellum IO, which is just a cache of that and doesn't have all those attributes. What we can do is let's calculate the, instead of doing it from the velocity here, let's just take that and let's see, point velocity. I think this can actually calculate our speed for us. Yep, compute acceleration. And it can calculate speed for us. We're not going to add velocity. Oh, sorry. Keep. All right, let's see how this works for us. Hopefully this won't screw anything up too much. It's too bad. Okay, well, probably easier way is just to say, we'll just do a simple point wrangle here. It's not gonna be anything too scary. We'll just do a point wrangle because this is gonna be the easy way to do this. Or you know what? No, sorry. Let's just do a fop. Let's do a point fop because this you can visualize that a little, maybe a little nicer. So we'll just say calc speed. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the length of these vectors, basically. Here, these velocity vectors. So we're going to take velocity. We're going to get the length of it here. So this vector is going to go into here. So now we're calculating the length of our velocity. And we can just do a bind export. Drop it in here. And we'll call this speed. And so now we have our speed attribute here, right? And we can just kind of filter by speed, right? So, so that's calculating the speed now for us. And what we can do, instead of doing some weird thing with vectors, now we just have a float that's basically saying what our top and bottom speed are here. So these are basically just the length of those vectors. If we looked at turned on this, we'll see that those with the long blue lines there are going to be our kind of our fastest moving particles here. And what we can do then is we can do again a blast node. And let me see, I think I have this. Yep. So I have some I have qlib installed and aelib, and those install these really nice presets. So I really highly recommend this if you want to see some ways of doing, working with attributes and even just with like a blast node to kind of, prune down the number of points in your scene. So here, for example, if the point attribute is less than a certain value, we'll do that. So here, what we've now set up here is we're looking at the, what it's pulling it's saying at, and then grabbing this string here, which is this right here. So it says CHS attrib, that's right here. And then it's getting CH value and pulling that in. So it's saying that if P scale is less than a certain value, do that. So what we want to do is the attribute we want is speed. And we are going to say if, we can just go back to that. If the speed is less than a certain amount, we're going to remove it. So oh, I'm not on it. That's why. Okay, so there we go. Now we can see these attributes here. So obviously these are basically 0. I mean, probably if we go up a little bit, they won't prune immediately, but we can kind of pull these back and get a sense of the particles maybe that we'd want to source some dust from. So maybe a tenth. Yeah, it's good. Maybe a quarter, something like that. And so there you go. We're getting exactly the ones that are, causing that to happen, right? So what we could do then is we could also use the speed and use that as a density input into something like a pyro solver, right? Because really that's the whole point of Houdini, right? Is to be able to use these attributes and kind of pass them along to new solvers and different things like that. So it's kind of like, yeah, cool. I mean, it's a really simple thing, right? This is literally just using a blast node to pull out some points, right? To pull out some points that are moving faster than a certain speed. And then, yeah, it looks cool. Looks like a fun sim. And you can obviously turn this up more. So if we set this to something maybe more like 0.5, we're going to get a really not small amount, but a very kind of close, dense amount right up next to where this plow is actually hitting, right? Where this plow is pushing this snow. So that's kind of our main section of it now, right? So and really the thing that's happening here too, just to kind of keep this in perspective, is we're basically just adding a couple of what are considered spare parameters here. If you want to ever edit any of these interfaces, they're all editable, right? You can, like, what I did here is nothing crazy. Like, you can go in here and say edit parameter interface. And if you want a new, let's say you want a new string to be able to be put in here, we could add this here and say Peter's string, call this Pete string, like that. And if I hit apply and accept, it adds a new string in here that I could then bring into any other parameter or use in certain situations like that. So when you see these types of things happen, these aren't like a black box thing that's happening that you can't touch. Like, you can come in here and tweak all these things to your heart's content, right? Like, that is the daunting thing and the amazing thing about Houdini, is that it's all customizable. It's all there for you to be able to work with and tweak. So if that's something you've never really played with before, or you see something like that happen when you hit a certain parameter or whatever, don't be like, oh, that's so cool, but like, I don't know how exactly they did that. This really is just, this is pulling up into here. This is pulling to here, and it's writing this. As I middle click this, it evaluates that and says that's what the attribute is right there. I could just type that in any normal blast node. Like if I did blast here and said at speed is less than 0.4 and say points, these should basically be identical. There shouldn't be really any different there. It might be slightly different because it's rounding it a little bit differently here, right? It's kind of a different rounding, but they should be almost identical. So basically this blast node is just, the way that they have this set up is just giving you a really nice way to be able to pull some of these things in quicker and tweak them and have some sliders and things like that. So I can build that from scratch myself. I can add those attributes in, all that kind of stuff. So just in case that's something you've never seen before, very, very, hopefully not too foreign of a concept for you. All right, so let's source this in. We have points, right? We have particles. We can just start sourcing these in to our scene here. So into a volume. So let's do a let's see, we'll do a volume rasterize attributes. And the attribute we're going to rasterize is density, right? But we don't have density yet. So this isn't going to, like, we're probably not going to rasterize these. So let's do that. Let's give ourselves, an attribute to rasterize. So again, we can grab one of those attribute adjust floats, right? And these are really great. If you're not super familiar with Vex or Vops yet, these are really great because they do a lot of those kind of more precise, attributes, mapping type functions in just a node by itself. Inside of here, there's definitely a lot of code and vex and things like that would be in here. But, this, if this scares you, writing a bunch of code, this gives you an idea, but you can always dive in there and look at it too. So keep that in mind. But, okay, so we're going to do density. And let's do this as a remap attribute. And we'll grab this from the speed. And let's see here. We can, so if I turned this off, this blast node off and computed the range, it's going to go from 0 to 6.3987, blah, blah, blah. Here, if I turn this back on and compute the range, it's going to go from 0.4 because I'm deleting those points, right? So, we can do this any number of ways, right? You could technically turn this off and source from the whole thing and then set, this up to like the minimum, or like, set this source range up to 0.4 with all of the points in there. There's many ways of doing this, but I think this is just a nice visualization to be able to kind of see that. So either way we can have this work, but let's just do it like this, where we're going to have anything below 0.4 is going to be kind of our low end. And we'll just say 6.3 just to round it off there at the top. So those are going to be our source ranges that are going to be coming in. And we should be able to visualize this by clicking up here and making sure this is on. So there you go. We can now start to see this density attribute be built in here. So as this goes and the speed increases in these certain points, that's where we'll get the higher amount of kind of dust getting pushed into the simulation. So, and again, we could remap this too, right? Just like we did before. So we could grab both of these here, open this up and just say B-spline. We could set this to, kind of push these values around a little bit. So we're going to get more, the higher up we go in here, right? So maybe something like that. And maybe even push this forward a little bit as well. And so anything that's really, really going fast, is gonna get that, nice high amount of dust kind of, or the dusty snow kind of thing put in there. And for some things that aren't, they won't have as much, contribution. So there's certainly a bunch of different ways we can tweak this. And this is the Houdini stuff, right? This is the Houdini way of working, right? Hey, oh, sorry, the color of your name there, Tezzy. Cool. Nice to have you with us. Welcome to the stream. Glad you joined us. Yeah, so this is kind of the way of bringing these attributes around and kind of tweaking them and doing different stuff with them. Another thing to keep in mind here too is that if you're like, oh, I really want to push one of these really hard. Well, if we set this to something more like 5, right, we're going to get full, kind of density in certain areas here, right, where these are really moving. So now you can see how that's kind of given this upper limit kind of clamp happening there, so that these pieces are really pushing right up against that. So maybe we do 5.25 or maybe something like 5.5 to give us maybe a little bit up at the very top of this to make sure that we're, getting some of those pieces. But there you go. We're starting to get some of that look going there. And maybe, for some of these down here, we just leave it like that. Right. So now we have a density attribute that's being built in here, which is fun. We're starting to get somewhere there. And if we come down here to this volume rasterize attributes, we should be able to grab now our density attribute and start rasterizing that into a volume. So what we're seeing here though is not a whole lot. Like you're seeing it happen, right? But why are we not seeing any volume, right? And I think the thing that you might not always have on in your scene is if you hit D, you go into geometry. No, where is it? Sorry. Guides. Under guides, you can set up these additional informations here. And I usually like to have these on just for my own sake. They might slow your viewport down, so keep that in mind. But I like to have them because I reference them a lot. So if you have your geometry information set to always on, you get this nice little thing down here. And it might be a little hard to see, but this says we have 9,000 voxels. And if you know anything about volumes, 9,000 is nothing. So we clearly are way too small. So let's set this a little higher. Let's do 0 0.5. Let's do 0 0.1. Maybe that's going to be, yeah. Let's see. Okay, I'm starting to see some of the volume in here, right? Maybe we could have actually seen it a little bit. Oh yeah, it's actually there a little bit. It's really hard to see though. It's very, very tiny. Let's see here. We'll do a volume visualize. If I could type volume visualization. We're just going to up the scale of this here a little bit, density scale, just to see it a little bit better. We'll just give it a nice kick up here. All right, there we go. We got 10 on the density scale. And yeah, so if we change this down to, I don't know, 0 0.5, let's do 0. Something like that. There we go. Now we're getting that nice density kind of getting sourced in there. There it is, getting sourced into our simulation. And the other thing we should probably source in here is probably the velocity. We can source that in as well. There we go. We're starting to get our volumes sourced into this simulation. So we can just kind of set this off to the side for right now. So just a reminder of what's happening here is that this volume rasterize attribute is creating VDBs. So it's making two VDBs for us. We've got density and velocity. So what we can do here is we can also say, we'll say V star, and we'll do a little up caret thing here, and that says not V. So hopefully that'll set that to invisible. I think it should, hopefully. But basically what this is doing is setting density as a float volume, and then velocity is a vector volume. You can see here it says vector 3. So this is creating two VDBs, and that's coming from these attributes that we're creating. So right here we have density. This has created a point attribute here that should say density somewhere. There it is right there. And so that density attribute is what's being turned into a volume here. So there is our volume attribute getting made. So that's all looking good. So yeah, maybe I'll just set that back because that seems a little weird. I don't know. Doesn't seem like that's doing exactly what I wanted it to, but that's fine. All right, cool. We've got our volumes going here. So what we can do is then we can do a solver. And here's our sources. I'm at 74, so I'm just going to go back here. All right, so we're going to have some sources to put in here, and we also need some collision geometry. So let's just pipe this collision geometry into here as well. And so now we've got that colliding with our volumes. Let's do bounds and just say boundary conditions treat y as closed below 0. In fact, I'm going to do one extra little thing where I'm going to take this voxel size, copy that parameter. I'm going to paste it over here and just set this to negative. So this will make sure that we have one kind of voxel that is, that's fine. That should work. This is just going to make sure that we have one voxel down basically in our simulation. So it's just below the ground plane by that one voxel. In this case, it's a 1/10, but what we'll do is we'll also change this. We'll say voxel size here. We'll copy that parameter and bring it down here and source that in. So we'll paste that as a relative reference. And now there we go. We have our voxel size set there. Great. So that is working. So one thing that's happening here is that on that first frame, it actually is sourcing from all of the entire ground, right? Because if we look at this here, we see that all of those have like a little bit of motion to them. And then it cuts off finally here. So kind of unfortunate. There's some stuff we could do there, but I'm just gonna let it do its thing. Okay, so we have setup here. So we're gonna be doing a sparse simulation, so that's good. Up the cache memory here so that we have a decent amount. Hopefully we won't go too crazy here. Collisions from collision geometry, great. All right, let's look at sourcing here. So we're sourcing density from density. We're not sourcing temperature, so we don't need to worry about that. We're not sourcing flame, but this we're sourcing Vel. So we're taking the source volume of V and putting it into the velocity field. So that's good. Density is good. Let's up the source scale a little bit here, maybe to like, I don't know. Let's do it. Let's just double it for right now. We can always play with that a little bit more. Dissipation, we don't need to worry about flame because that's not a thing we're doing here. We could do speed, that could work. Don't need buoyancy because it's actually going to have some gravity to it, which in fact we might need buoyancy, but instead of doing it in the negative one, we could do it in the one, which means it'll go down. So yeah, that could work. I'm just gonna make this a little bit less, like maybe like point. Let's do like a quarter. We'll do 0.25. All right, so that's good. And for now, we'll just kind of leave that as is. We don't need fire here. That's not going to be a thing. And we can set this up a little higher to something like 10, just to really see what's going on here. So let's give this its thing. These are just going to be really tiny little sources that get added here. We'll let it go for a second. And what it should do after several frames here, hopefully, is that some of these will dissipate enough and it'll start to reduce the size of this simulation. So let's see what happens here. Yeah, there we go. It's really strange. We're only getting some smoke there. That's really odd. Why is it doing that? Something going on weird with this. No. Yeah, with Pyro, yes, it can run into some memory things. Yeah. It definitely helps if you're doing heavy simulations to to have a good amount of memory. Yeah, for sure. Um it does help. Yes. Not you don't have to have a crazy amount, but 64 gigs is probably a good place to go if you want to have, a lot of, if you want to have some good, the ability to do some good sized simulations, right? All right, I'm going to bring this up just a little bit just so we can go a little faster here and see what's happening. So here, what if I do this to 10? Yep, there we go. Definitely have density there, so that shouldn't be the issue. Let's just see. Source this again, just leave that back to 1. Okay, let's try this. Oh, I know why it's happening. I know why it's happening. Because this shape is causing the issue. So let's look here. Collision. Yes, that's the problem. Okay. Does memory scale relative to what you have, or do you always need to set it in the solver? No, 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 no. Yeah, the reason I'm doing that is mainly for this caching down here. Yeah, it doesn't. It's not an issue. Like if I didn't set these here, gosh, where is it set up? Yeah, if I didn't set this cache memory here, like so, if I go back down to 5,000, for example, and just do this for a second, you're gonna see that this blue bar really pretty quickly is well, maybe not very quickly, but in not too long here, it's going to start to kind of pull away here. And so right now, when this blue bar is here, I can go through here and skim around and see, okay, here's my simulation, it's pushing around, all this stuff, great. But once it starts to go a little further here, I'm guessing maybe around here it's going to do that. You're going to see that this is going to stop caching. These are going to have to get removed from the cache. And so, yeah, there you go. At that point, if I stop this, I should be able to move around here, right, and see it. But if I go back and then go back to here, it's going to reset. So that's why I'm setting that, just more so for visualizing it. It doesn't have to have that all saved in memory. In fact, especially when you get into really big simulations, turning off the cache is actually a really important step in a lot of cases, because if you try to keep all these files in cache or all these frames in cache, like it could overload your RAM and then end up crashing your simulation or whatever. So when I go into bigger projects, like huge stuff, like especially like that snowboarding thing that I was showing a little earlier, I'll turn off the cache when I'm cooking those to disk and saving them out, like because it kind of gets away from you sometimes, and it has just more likelihood to crash if it overloads. So another thing to keep in mind is if you're doing GPU stuff, all of your GPU, like any simulation that's going on the GPU, all that memory needs to fit on the GPU in most cases. Hopefully in coming years that won't be such a problem, but that's why things like a 3090 or a 4090 with 24 gigs of VRAM is really nice, because if you have 8 and you're trying to fit a whole bunch of stuff in there that's simulating, each frame has to fit onto that thing. So you can see that, if my cache for a single frame or for a series of frames is at 5 gigs, and this isn't a crazy simulation, you could see how that could really spiral kind of out of control quickly. So anyways, the problem that's going on here, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm seeing it here, is that this Pyro solver, I'm actually going to do something that's a little different. I'm going to allow editing of contents of this so I can go inside and look at it. So this is the inside of the Pyro solver. So let's all see the inside here and get a little freaked out. This is all that's going on in there. So, which seems like a lot, but it's actually not as crazy as you'd think. Okay, so here's our collider, right? So if I want to look at this here, let's go back to the beginning here, and I should be able to, display this geometry. Okay, so right now I'm in DOPS now, because inside of these SOP solvers, quote unquote, are DOPS. They're always going to be a DOP thing. So anyway, so I can display my geometry for the collider. There it is. What I'm going to do is look at the collision guide here and see what this looks like. And we're not seeing that, which is interesting. Okay, so I think what it's doing is it's using this as its collider geometry, unfortunately. So that is why those sources aren't coming in the middle there, because they're inside of that collider, and they won't source, Pyro won't source inside of a collider. So that is what I think is happening and why it's freaking out. So let's go in here. Let's say match current definition. That sets it right back to how it is in default. And here we're going to do a VDB from polygons. And so now if I do this, I'm going to just go to collision here. I'm going to say SDF and volume velocity. So here it's looking for collision SDF and volume velocity volume. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and this, when you see these kind of things, this is an SDF, right? Sign distance field. And so this is going to create a surface. What we actually need it to be called is collision. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put this up here. So now we have a collision VDB. If we middle click on this, we've got the name collision right here. And we don't need this to be quite as dense as the other stuff. So let's do this to maybe like, I think we had the other one at 0.2. I don't know. Maybe we will do it at 0.25, something like that. Just to get a little bit of these shapes in here is going to be helpful. Make sure we get as good of a curve as we can. It's pretty quick. It's only a couple 100,000 voxels. And let's just run this through. Sure enough, that's looking pretty stable. Great. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the surface attribute. And the attribute is going to be the point velocity. Now, I don't actually think that does have a velocity. So what I'm going to do now is do a point velocity just to calculate that, just to make sure that this collider has velocity on it. It'll just help with some of the computations that are happening there. So now if we look at this, should have a velocity, and it's really just moving in the Z direction. There it goes. Great. So we're going to use this point V to make a V VDB. So now we should have two. Should have one that's called collision, one that's called V. It's looking good. Here we have collision, here we have V. All right, so now let's see how this will work if we're using that as our collision. Hoping better. We'll see. Yes, there we go. All right. Now we got something happening. A little too crazy, but you know, it's doing its thing. So yeah, we obviously don't need that much smoke, but right. So we're getting somewhere here. A little too dense, but there's our So the thing that's happening there when it's like really freaking out up at the top here is that it's actually huzzah. Yes, it works. Victory. What's happening here with these weird like cuts is that this is actually because it's this sparse solver. If we sorry, where is it? Fields? Yeah. If we do this and set it to active region, you'll see something very interesting that you'll start to notice here is that these kind of cuts that are showing up there are actually really lining up with where some of these boxes are, right? So where some of these edges are. And so what we're actually dealing with there is that the this sparseness of this solver isn't pushing away fast enough. Because like if we look at the bounding box, that's the bounding box of the actual sim. But the active region of the sim is right there. So we actually need to kind of say a little more ahead. We don't want it to take so long to kind of catch up to itself. So we'll just visualize that for a second. Let me try to remember where that is. Sorry. Let me think about this. Where is it? It's in here. There it is. So we'll extrapolate the velocity into new tiles. That'll be helpful. We can also expand it by some velocity as well. So let's see if that helps. That might give us a little bit more expansion here. You'll see that, okay, these are all the active tiles. And once it realizes like, it's not really active anymore, it's going to shrink this whole computation down. There it goes. So now, if you're looking at it here, we don't have those cuts really happening on the front, right? Because we're expanding by the velocity. So it's not getting that freak out anymore of like, what's going on here? Why are these, why is the front of this thing like cutting up, right? So now we've got this kind of, thing going on here. It's kind of doing its thing now. It's not freaking out quite as much. So, definitely sourcing way too much in here. So we're going to just fix that a little bit. Let's set this back to 1 for right now. And we can set, I actually like to set the sourcing in here a bit better. But because we were running into some problems, I was messing around with it. So let's do it here. Let's say 2. Let's see where that gets us. Might not be super obvious in here, but we'll get a little bit of dust kicking up, and that's going to be good. There it is. Some little dust. Yeah, actually, that still might be maybe even a little too much. Maybe, I don't know. Be hard to say. Let's do this and let it kind of calculate through. And what we can do here then is we can actually take. Sorry, I wish I'm gonna move these over. Could actually take this, shift click this, merge those together, and we could actually see what this looks like with both of our sources here. So now we're getting that like kicking up kind of thing going on here. Let's go maybe back to our camera. We can take a look at what this looks like. Ah, it's still playing. I always forget to stop those from playing. And there's definitely some sort of weirdness going on here with this collider. Like we could make a better collider for that. Volumetrics can be a little tricky within collision geometry, so you might want to make something a little bit more there. But you know, we're getting some smoke sourced in here, and obviously this is doing some sort of weird things with it, pushing forward and like some of that stuff. Like I actually don't understand why it's doing that at the very end there. It's like shooting forward. Seems a little crazy. Oh, I know why. Probably because we're adding the velocity in, and that's probably the issue. So let me tweak that real quick. But it's working, which is kind of fun. All right, so let's go back into the sourcing here. Yep, this is just straight up adding this in, and that's not what we wanted to do. I believe how we normally like to do this is pull. So let me leave that for a second, and let me just do let's do a pyro configure fireball. I don't care. Something's interesting. So the reason I'm doing this is just to try to, I just want to jog my memory, right? So this is the setup for the pyro burst fireball, right? This is just a shelf tool. This isn't anything too crazy. So there's your fireball, right? Boom. Cool. Anyways, what I want to know is for the velocity, how are they sourcing that? So I'm going to go in here, and I think this is for anybody that's playing around with stuff, these presets are great. So use these pyro configure whatever all the time. But so here's the sourcing, right? And they have all these set up. And if I go down to the bottom here, we have Vel, and I can see that it's set to pull, which basically means like, imagine it's like got like kind of this influence on the velocities that are happening there. And it's going to kind of try to bring those in the direction that it's moving, but not just instantly set it or add in velocity. It's going to try to make that kind of move in the direction it wants it to. So here we have acceleration strength, deceleration strength, and direction strength. So pull, they have the source scale set to 5. We can play around with that, but that's just something to keep in mind when we do this. So let's bring this down here. And source scale, maybe we'll try 2.5. We won't go as crazy as them. So we got pull and direction strength. What is this going to do? When enabled, controls how strongly. I see. So this is kind of how strongly the vectors are pushed along that. So, okay, we'll leave that on. We'll give it a shot. All right, so let's see what happens here. See how this looks. Should hopefully be a little less chaotic with the with the velocity. Yeah, Definitely, we're not getting these crazy kind of bursts here. All right, let's go all the way with that source scale 5. See how that works for us. One thing to note here too is that the smoke is kind of, some of it's like settling down a little bit too because we have that buoyancy field set. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to up the acceleration strength a little bit just so that it wants to maybe accelerate a little quicker than decelerate, just so it's not like if it gets a value of 0, it's not just like slamming stopped. So let's do that. Let's just maybe double that, see how that goes first, and then we can go from there. Might need a little bit more source scale still, but so this is a bit more of a subtle thing than just doing the add the velocity in, right? Because when you're adding velocity, if those velocities are pointing in the same direction, those are going to add up. So like those vectors add on top of each other and make stronger and stronger direction. All right, already that's starting to look a little bit better. So I bet if we up the source scale a little bit more, we'll probably be in a good spot. But that was why that stuff was like shooting forward, was because it was like the velocities just kind of were pushing in that direction. And so when all of those vectors were aligning, it was just adding on top of each other and just making this like crazy push of velocity kind of moving in that direction. So all right, let's do this. Double that again. Kind of see where we go here. Cool. This should start looking interesting. Let's give this a shot. I'm gonna add a new sequence in here just to take a look at this. And yeah, so some of the stuff you might want to turn down in a simulation like this, like if you want it to be more particle-y feeling and like particulate, turning down the dissipation so it doesn't die off so quick at the end here. Again, there is still this kind of pushing at the end here that's feeling a little bit. It's a great question. Well, first of all, I just want to show this one last thing here. If you see this, this is definitely like pushing a little too much in that direction. So I'm not super thrilled with that, but you know, it might, you might have to play around with some of those sourcing controls. But, this, in this example, all the velocity just happens to be going in that one direction. So that's certainly a bit of a weird scenario, right? So, anyways, that is doing that. Okay, so interesting question was just asked, and I think we're getting kind of close here to maybe the end of the evening, anyways. But this will be a good question maybe to end on. So yeah, so we've got our snow stuff going here. Everything's kind of starting to do its thing, so that makes me happy. I feel like we've got a good end point here, and hopefully some interesting stuff. I might play around with this maybe next week or whatever as I'm finishing up some of these ideas. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about rendering or something next week. We'll have to kind of see what how far I am along with this project. But the question is, do you know all the nodes, or do you just search stuff? The nodes are so confusing for me. And yeah, I get that for sure, because you hit tab and that brings up your nodes, right? And you've got tons and tons of stuff in here, right? Now there are some things, for example, like I've added in this QLib. This is a whole library of new node tools, basically, that are built by I forget who makes those actually. What if it's a group of people. But anyways, this is actually a guy, I think one of the creative guys from Man vs. Machine actually has put out this AE lib, which is really nice as well. But when you're talking about, do I know all the nodes? No, I don't know all the nodes. I've become more familiar with a lot of them over the years. But like, for example, crowds, I mean, that is just foreign to me in a lot of ways. I have not done a lot of crowd work. It's not something I've done a lot of. And I'm really not an expert on that at all. So that is one kind of area that I'm not super familiar with. But I think the thing with Houdini, and in fact, I was talking to some educators about this idea today about how do you know what nodes go with what other nodes, right? We're talking to some professors and things like that today. We have like a little like bi-monthly chat. And, the concept of like having like a family of like, okay, these nodes all kind of go together is something that people have asked for or said, could we do that or whatever? And it certainly, I think, could be something that could be a bit more, a thing over time. Another thing too, just to know, is that there's actually a secondary way now of searching things in, that's a great thing, KG. Yeah. One thing he said, use the nodes to learn them. When you just watch people use them or read about them, it never sticks. And that's true. Yeah. I mean, being able to actually get in there and do what the other person is doing is huge. And I think that's always an important thing, is like get in there, play around with them, see what they do. And just if anybody else is kind of curious about this one other thing, if you do Control D now in there, there's this thing called the dash box. And so this is a way that you can search for other things in just in Houdini. So like if I wanted to do, let's see, it looks like if I do this, help, and then maybe VDB, I can look up this, and this will show me all the help stuff for VDBs, right? So if I wanted to see something about maybe like VDB from polygons, I could do this, and it's going to open up the help documentation and show me how this works, basically, and give me some explanations here. So that's another thing too that you can use. That's called the dash box. So Control D, and that'll bring that up. You can even do math in here, do some search for paths, search for node types, different things like that. So nice little new thing, right, that we've added in recently. But the way that I kind of go about this isn't trying to learn nodes, it's trying to understand workflows, right? I think is a really important thing, because if you want to like, so for colliders, right, I was kind of talking about that, and I was like, oh, I put down a VDB from polygons and that'll do that. Well, collisions for a lot of different types of workflows, and especially simulations, those are usually done with volumes, with SDFs, right? So it's not about understanding all of the nodes that work with, that create an SDF or that can tweak it or whatever. It's understanding what an SDF is, and that assigned distance field tells you in a volumetric representation how far away from a surface you are, right? So positive outside, negative inside. That in Houdini. And so that is kind of a concept, right? That's like a core concept to working with simulation. And it's true in a lot of software. It's just they don't always give you the option to actually get in there and dig into it. So, okay, so now I know, well, okay, SDF has to do with volumes. If I'm talking volumes, I'm probably talking about a VDB. So those are two things I already kind of know. So like if I wanted to say like, oh, okay, so I need to make a collision object. Well, I should probably be using a VDB, and here's all the VDB nodes right here, right? They're all kind of under this section, right? So you could come in here and look at these and say, okay, VDB, oh, interesting. There's some SDF things in here as well. So if I wanted to take, for example, this VDB right here that's an SDF, and I wanted to do something with it, well, typing in now SDF, I can see, oh, here's all these VDB nodes, right? They've got these little icons, and I might be able to say like, oh, if I want to maybe reshape it or something, okay, what is that going to do? Okay, well, if I put this in here. This is looking for a VDB, right? It says right here, input VDB. And so I'm going to look at this and I can actually say like, oh, okay, this is going to make this grow, right? So it's actually growing this sign distance field. So it's kind of bulging out that collision. There's many reasons you might want to do that. There's also reasons you might want to cut it away. So so that's kind of some of the ways that for me, I kind of find things is like understanding the workflows, right? You want to make groups. Well, if you type group in, right, you're going to get a lot of stuff that has to do with working with groups. And as far as naming goes, I know that the developers try really hard to make sure that those things kind of are grouped by name in some ways. So that's kind of not an answer, but it's maybe a way to think about it and not to feel so overwhelmed by it. Because if you're really interested in learning something about kin effects, it's a big subset of what's going on in here. But it certainly isn't thousands of nodes, right? And once you get into certain things and you want to say like mocap and bring it in, okay, well, I know under kin effects, if I want to bring mocap in, there's only a couple nodes here that I might have to work with and playing around with them and seeing how they work. So I think that is something to kind of keep in mind is that, when you go inside of something like a DOP network, right? This DOP network, and you come in here and you're like, oh, there's all these micro solvers and all these different things in here, right? Everything changes when you go inside of here. It's like, you're not ever going to be able to know all of the nodes in Houdini. It's more about understanding concepts and some of the workflows. And then from there, like KG was saying, like you might see people using them and be like, oh, that's an interesting node. That should link up with this node and work with it. And there really is, in a lot of cases, no one right workflow or wrong workflow to connect things together, right? Sometimes connecting your nodes together one way versus another is going to create totally different, results, or just having one extra node in there doing something is going to give you a completely different result. So that is certainly one of the daunting things of learning Houdini is all of the nodes and kind of how that sometimes feels not super obvious what you need to do. But I think when you start to break down some of those things, concepts, like higher level concepts, that can start to give you kind of a path into finding the nodes that you might need to use or might want to use. So for example, one thing, this attribute section here, right? If you want to tweak nodes, using the attribute adjust. So if you just type adjust, these are all of those kind of nodes that work very similarly to the float attribute adjust that I was doing before. So, so it's kind of about knowing some of these context clues when you're searching for things. So yeah, it's tricky. It's always going to be a hard thing to know all the nodes, and nobody knows all the nodes. And sometimes you forget them too. We were talking today and somebody said, I always forget the, I think it's convert line, the convert line node. He just always forgets that for whatever reason. And it's a way to take, an input curve or whatever and turn it into all these separate little pieces, instead of it being one long polygon, it turns each section into a polygon. So, I mean, I'm learning new nodes all the time. They're making new nodes all the time. But another thing to be encouraged with too is that some of these nodes are built of nodes, right? And so when you start to break it down that way, the building blocks of nodes are actually finer and finer. And when you get down to a certain level, there's only certain types of nodes that are really being used in those. So understanding that there's some that are very like high level tools and that there's some that are more like for doing individual tasks is also a great thing to kind of keep in mind. So yeah, hopefully that's at least something. It's a little long-winded, but talking through it and thinking through some of these things is good. And yeah, if you're ever, again, like I said, we have a Discord, link at HoudiniHangout.com. You can get on the Discord server through there. I'm always a little weird to like just hand that out like on social media and things like that, because I like want it to be a little bit more like, hey, you got to go do this, instead of just like having bots follow in there and stuff. So anyways, go to houdinihangout.com. I just put that in the chat, and you can get to the Discord server there. And if you're running into issues or have questions about something that I've done here in this, kind of workflow, we can, certainly talk about it, hash through it. If you have topic ideas, anything like that. I really enjoy that side of it, being able to have conversations with all you guys, because like that's the thing that's really cool about this, and kind of the idea of the whole channel is to have a place to hang out and talk about Houdini, learn new things, and kind of just be able to make some connections and a community. So encourage you to go there, check that out. I think this is where we will end it for today. So hopefully it's kind of interesting seeing some of, taking a Vellum simulation, linking it into then a Pyro solver, all in one kind of chain of nodes, getting something kind of interesting out of it at the end. There's always more tweaking to do. Simulation is never going to be finished. You just have to kind of stop tweaking the parameters at some point. Kind of like art, but it's like tech art, right? So anyways, so yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. Of course. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Yeah. Glad to have you guys around. No problem, man. I'm just trying to make a space to be able to have these conversations. So, please go online, and vote, on the Discord, and say, what you're interested in for next year. I have it open for like a whole week, so it'll be open into next week. So if you forget, or if you see this after the fact, you can always come in and hey, Lucas. Yeah, sorry, just missed it. Well, that's all right. You can always go back and watch it later if you'd like to, but we did some snow shoveling type stuff. So, and some smoke and things like that. So anyways, so thank you guys so much for joining the stream tonight. Always really fun to get to chat with all you guys. So see you next week. The year's kind of winding down, so I know probably there might be less and less people as we get closer and closer to Christmas, but I'll still be yes, exactly. I need to do a little art project for a snow thing that I want to submit. So I was like, well, kind of already had this idea for a snow plow, like coming at like a snowman or something. So for the little image. So I figured, why not give something interesting seasonal for the stream. So great. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Have a great rest of your evening or day or whatever time of day it might be for you, wherever you're watching. So, leave comments below if you have any questions or anything like that. And I'll see you guys next time. So have a good one, and talk to you soon. See ya.